Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Moran Show. On today's show, I got John Tortorelli joining me to talk about the NBA because there's a lot of things going on. Joel Embiid is having a historic scoring season. Victor Wembanyama's teammates, for whatever reason, are not the biggest fan of him. They're not passing him the ball. We're going to talk about teams that are doing great in the West, like the Clippers on their win streak, the Timberwolves, OKC, and more. And we're going to talk about teams that are struggling, like the Lakers and the Suns. And to cap it all off, Week 16 upset picks. Stay tuned. Joining me now is Mr. John Tortorelli. How you doing, John?
I'm feeling good. Thank you for having me on. We got a lot of teams to talk about today, including your guy, James Harden. He's trying to rip off that fraud label, it seems like, as we speak.
And James Harden's doing a great job at doing it. He's playing great as of recently. For all those watching on the Pick Aside YouTube channel right now, I just want to let you guys know something. This week, there will not be a second Pick Aside episode. We're taking a holiday weekend off. Riv is on vacation. He comes back Saturday. I'm still in Arizona. Next week, Riv will be back. And then the 29th, I will be back in New Jersey, and I won't be virtual anymore. Before we get into the show, John, I got a promotion for the audience out there. Prize Picks has a free square going on. 1 point equals a win for Mr. Kevin Durant on Christmas Day against the Dallas Mavericks. You and I know damn well Kevin Durant is going to get at least 1 point. I mean, it's Kevin Durant. He might get 30, but this is a free square for you guys to use. And whether you have Prize Picks now or you don't have Prize Picks downloaded, you can use this free square. I have already used it. Unfortunately, I lost 2 entries while using it, and I can't use it anymore. But if you already are on the app or you're not on the app, you can use it. It doesn't matter. And if you are not on the app, it's very easy to download it. You go to the App Store, type in Prize Picks, you download the app, you sign up, and then you just put an entry in. You can put your entry in on NFL, on NBA, on other sports, and given their points or assists or rebounds, you can pick them to go more or less that given number. You put an entry in and you have a chance to win some money if it does indeed win. It's very easy. It helps out the podcast a ton if you guys do it, and it's a free square. It's a free entry. You might as well use it. Prize Picks, shout out to them. They're doing Picksmas. It's every day and leading up into the day of Christmas, okay. John. You get a special promotion. My promotion today was a $50 free play, which means that, you know, I put $50 on an entry. If it doesn't win, they give me the money back. If it does win, you know, I get some money. So it's risk free. It's a free play, and they're doing that every day of leading up until Christmas. It's called Picksmas. Something good that Prospects is doing. A very good promotion.
And that KD free score is money because this year he's averaging his most points, 31 points, since 2014 in a full decade. So he's been having like a under the radar season. I think you compare KD right now to all of his years in Brooklyn, and he's playing just as, if not better.
He is. I want to start off the show talking about the Spurs because I think that a lot of us had higher expectations for them coming into the season. We thought that they had some good pieces in place. You know, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones. I think Zach Collins is good. And then you have the allure of Greg Popovich coaching this team. You know, I was somebody that said if Victor Wembanyama is who we think he is, this team can compete for a playing spot. Well, it turns out Victor Wembanyama is who we think he is, but they are one of the worst teams in the NBA. And you see a bunch of these viral clips of teammates not passing him the ball. And it kind of feels like players have refused to accept their role on the team. It feels like they want to outshine this rookie. What have been your takeaways watching the Spurs this year?
At 4-24, I've been blown away by how many games been uncompetitive. And coming in this year, it seemed like San Antonio was going to develop Wemby by playing him with the center. And inherently, Victor is still 19 years old. He's not necessarily the player that the highlights will fully indicate. So I agree with you. It's been a very impressive rookie year, but he's not necessarily the shot creator to be a do-it-all at 19 years old offensive engine, which means it's very important you put next to him a high-level facilitator. And the Spurs are actually top 5 this year in assists per game, believe it or not, with a variety of different playmakers in the roster. The issue is the starting point guard, Jeremy Shohan's playing the position for the first time in his life. So he's trying to learn how to even fit into this offense. And there's so much emphasis on him to be a facilitator when he's a connector. And those are two totally different roles. And so for me, I'm like, just start Trey Jones. The issue is Trey Jones isn't even quite a starting point guard because he's shooting 27, 22% from 3-point land. And so they have so many different constructural flaws that it's ultimately affecting his development in a negative way. And I'm not going to say they're failing Wemby or anything crazy like that because it's very early, but they need to get a true floor general who can break down defense, get into the teeth of it, and then get Wemby going, especially in lobs in a variety of different drives. Until they have that, I don't think they're going to be a very competitive team in this type of competitive Western Conference.
I think everything you said is fair. I think, those are takeaways that you'd have watching the game for sure. They don't have somebody that can set up the offense consistently. I was watching JJ Redick's podcast not too long ago, and he was talking about how Wembanyama can get the ball so much more, but Popovich is refusing to force feed him, you can say, within the offense. And there have been different opinions on it. People that are covering the game and watching basketball at a high level, like JJ Redick, he thinks that Popovich isn't using Wemby to his highest degree. And then there are other people saying that, well, you don't want Wemby to build bad habits. You don't want him to be a focal point of an offense as a rookie so early on because you want him to learn how to play team basketball. And I think this is kind of like a common case of overvaluing former great head coaches. Greg Popovich, no doubt, is going to go down as one of the best coaches in NBA history. But I think it's safe to say that at this point, he's not that. We saw post Kawhi where he went into this mid-range approach with DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge. It took him a while to fully adapt spacing and three-pointers within his offense. You look at the Spurs in recent history, they've drafted somewhat well, even though most of those players now, they're not great fits next to a player like Wemby. And now you see how he's using Wemby, and I don't want to give Popovich the excuse of he's just trying to teach Wemby how to play team basketball. I just don't think Popovich is that savvy of a coach anymore.
I think what it really comes down to is, as you alluded to, the brand of Greg Popovich getting a huge extension this all season. You lay the expectation that he can do what he did with Tim Duncan back 25 years ago, but he is losing his fastball. And the one claim to fame in this second stage of his coaching career is his ability to develop young talent. Devin Vassell, Kellen Johnson, DeJounte Murray. But he developed that young talent in a much different expectation. That was, okay, DeJounte Murray puts up 20 points per game, but they weren't really impacting games. It was somebody's going to have the ball, somebody's going to have very high usage. It's DeJounte. He's going to fill up the stat sheet. But I think back in the last 5 years, inherently he's not going to be the same exact coach. And I feel like in some ways it's a combination compared to New England Patriots in football. He doesn't have the perfect personnel. So he tries to compensate for that by fitting a square peg into a round hole. And then the main focal point, which is Wemby, is going to be negatively affected. I think there's one player to kind of solve some of these issues. When I said they need a driver, someone that can get to the teeth of the defense, I think Markelle Fultz would be really good for this Spurs team. If there's an important thing, I don't think you can play Fultz and Zach Collins together because of lack of shooting in Fultz's game. But if you put Wemby at the 5 with Markelle, the pair first overall picks together, I think would be a very good fit. And then you could have Trey Jones still come off the bench.
And I think that's very realistic because the Magic right now feels like they have Suggs and Black, and they're occupying those two guard roles. And they could possibly move off of Markelle, who after the season is on expiring contract. Right. I don't think that's the worst idea. But I do think it's funny how we just give these coaches a ton of leeway for making bad decisions. It's like, quite clearly Popovich isn't using Wemby properly. And the takeaway is, well, he's just trying to teach him how to play team basketball. He is not trying to teach him how to play like James Harden or Joel Embiid. He's trying to just teach him how to play team basketball. I'm like, I don't think it's that. I think that he doesn't know how to coach as great as other great head coaches right now because you can quite clearly see that Wemby is not being used like he should be utilized. If he was being utilized correctly, he'd be impacting the game so much more.
And the biggest way is losing him as a stand-up rim protector. Like the Zach Collins starting center treatment is not very good. He's a great backup center, and he can be a spot starter in some ways. But using Wemby primarily on the defensive end as a stand-up rim protector would solve a lot of their issues. And I think on offense, putting Wemby at the 5, because he's only making about 27, 28% of his threes right now, would be better with the overall floor spacing. Because you've got Keldon, you've got Vassell, you've got some wings that can create. And this is my other kind of common criticism with the roster construction. I said in the offseason they should have went out to make and this would have been a bad take because Jordan Poole's playing horrible right now, relatively to the expectation, a Jordan Poole for Keldon Johnson trade to even out the positional depth on the Spurs is you have 4 wings and 1 point guard and then 3 centers. And it's like, in today's NBA, wings are great, but you look at the Boston Celtics, they have multiple high-level facilitators and guards and Derek White and Drew Holiday, Marcus Smart. That way, everything's evened out. And I think with the amount of forwards they have to pick 1 or 2. Devin Vassell's an obvious one because his game is very malleable. And I believe Jeremy Shohan was too big of an investment to be moved on from so early. But I've always felt like Keldon Johnson is the odd man out here. He may be a great leader. I'm sure he's a very good teammate. And Spurs fans love him, but that's not why they should keep him. They have to move on from, I think, Keldon and try to get yourself a complimentary guard and somebody specifically that can run the offense. And the crazy thing, too, is Keldon's second on the team in assists right now. He's averaging 4 a game. He can play within this environment, but I don't think there's a clear role for him if you're also trying to develop Shohan. You can only pick one of them.
The Spurs have been very, very bad this year, and it's kind of getting overshadowed by just how historically bad the Pistons have been. The Pistons are 2-25, I think it is. Is that the record? 2-26. The Spurs are what? 4-24?
Yes.
We're talking about a gap in these teams that isn't that far off, but because the Pistons have lost 25 straight games, it's just become a huge storyline in the NBA. And I don't know where to start with this team because last night they were facing the Jazz in a game that they should have won. The Jazz had a laundry list of injuries. A lot of the injuries weren't to like the players that actually mattered, but most of them were. I mean, Lauri Markkanen, Jordan Clarkson, Keontae George, Helen Horn Tucker. I mean, most of their good players didn't play. And Cade has a great game. Marvin Bagley has a great game. And the Pistons still end up losing. And at this point, I feel like all the takes surrounding Cade Cunningham have kind of been thrown out the window because you clearly see that even when he does play great, this team can still lose by 20 points. I mean, they're that bad. But, oh, my God, being this awful, I was today in the morning, I was thinking about a comparison. Like, if we compare this team to the 2012 Bobcats, then Cade Cunningham is like the Kemba Walker of that team. It's like the only saving grace that is actually going to have like an NBA future. There might be other players on this team that might have that. Yeah, but it's like this team is so bad. And the Monty Williams contract just makes it even worse because he's somebody that has lost so many games in a row. And it feels like as of recently, he's trying new things, but it took him way too long to get to these type of solutions.
Okay, so I have a strong take. I think this is the worst offense I've seen in my entire life. And it really feels like Monty Williams is clueless and has been the entire time. So there was 2 different moments in this team season where I said to myself, I don't think they have any idea how bad they're going to be. One, when their owner and Tom Gora at the start of the season said, we may be a young team, but age is not an excuse. We're expecting playoffs. We're expecting to win games this year, and we're not going to use the youth of the team as an excuse. The second thing that told me, oh, boys, when Monty Williams a week ago goes, I really think it helps us. We've learned that when we're spacing the floor, we can score the ball. And then you look at the team, and Piston fans, God bless you guys, truly. They are 30th in they're 30th in 3-point attempts, 30th in 3-point mix, and 30th in 3-point efficiency. And I've felt this way for a year. When Troy Weaver last year acquired James Wiseman for Sadiq Bey, I said to myself, what are you doing? I'm like, you have Marvin Bagley. These are virtually the same exact players. And it's not that you are acquiring James Wiseman. It's that you're now going to waste any opportunity for James Wiseman to be an NBA rotation player and you get up a shooter in the process. And a year ago, there were multiple different times when Bojan Bogdanovic, who was playing fantastic for this team, the lights out shooter, he's a little bit more than a spot up player, was being on the trade market offered for 2 first round picks. Teams are willing to give up multiple assets. And Detroit said no. And Bojan had missed the first 22 games of this year. Bojan is the one player who fits this young core. And the issue is he's 34 years old. And when you look at this team's draft decisions, it's crazy to me. They're trying to win games. They've hit on over half of their first round picks, and over half of them have been top 10 selections. The issue is none of them actually complement one another's game. And the one guard who I think does complement Cade Cunningham is Jaden Ivey, because Jaden Ivey is this explosive 6'4" guard, offensively speaking, because defensively it's a different story. He reminds me of Victor Oladipo early in Orlando, where he's just so explosive. He's got a huge frame. And if he can put together the mid-range shooting in a couple of years, you're talking about one of the most explosive offensive guards in the game. But Monty Williams would not start him with Bojan, and he wouldn't start him with Asor. And I'm like, you're still starting Killian Hayes in year 4? You know Killian Hayes is not going to be here in a month and a half. The only reason why they're playing him is to raise his trade value. And then you look at the front court. Jalen Duren goes down. He's the one rim protector in the team draw. Explain to me how an NBA team could have 5 centers and only one of them can protect the rim. Only 1.5 of them can protect the rim. So now they have no rim protection, but half your roster is centers. And it's insane to me to think, out of all of the shooters in this team, this is the unfortunate part for them. Most of them are veterans, and most of them, Monte Morris has not played this year. He was supposed to be the perfect 6-man. Alec Burks has been hurt half the year. Kevin Knox is the team's second best shooter. He wasn't even here a couple weeks ago. And Bojan Bogdanovic is amazing, but he's only been here for about 6 games. How is it that all of these veterans are subsequently hurt while this young core has no identity? And quite frankly, the coach doesn't know what he's doing here.
Monty Williams has no idea what he's doing, and it shows in the Jaden Ivey benching, who now is playing and played a good game yesterday. Asor Thompson has now been benched. By the way, he's not in the starting lineup anymore, and he probably shouldn't have been there to begin with, given how bad of a shooter he is. He's very intriguing as a defender and as a rebounder. He's gifted athletically, but if you're trying to fit him around Cade, it was just clear from day one he didn't fit around Cade. And I think the trade you mentioned was a great point in the team not knowing the direction they were heading into. Troy Weaver traded Sadiq Bey for James Wiseman in hopes that maybe the second overall pick can be something. If James Wiseman was unable to be successful in Golden State, I mean, highly doubt that Detroit was going to be the saving grace landing spot for him to finally be a serviceable, good NBA player. Maybe to put up empty stats, but not to really be impactful. Sadiq Bey, for all the issues he has, because I think he's an overrated player, he's an inconsistent shooter, and he's not the defender that people prop him up to be off of name value.
Or expect him to be.
He would be way better for this team than James Wiseman, for sure. I just feel like this team has no identity. Like, you're right. And the veterans, like, if it was me in a perfect world, if I'm just like playing 2K simulation, then I'm starting Cade, I'm starting Ivy, I'm starting Joe Harris with Bojan, and then I'm starting Duren if he's healthy, just to give this team some semblance of life and shooting. I mean, even if on the other end you're going to give up buckets because Joe Harris is a terrible defender, I mean, you have to at least like give your team a chance on one side of the ball. And if you're going to go all in on one side, I think it has to be offensively, because that's going to give you your best chance to win games. The fact that Monty, after losing 20 straight games, realized that the solution is, wow, better spacing leads to more scoring, I think was a clown indictment on him. I don't know, man. I just think this team is done. This team is terrible. And I don't even know if Monty's going to last a season, quite frankly. Like, I think that he checked out last year and he only came back because of the money, but I don't think he's really in it.
I felt like Monty was very good in Phoenix, but this has been the worst hire in NBA history. I mean, they were better last year with Killian Hayes starting over Cade in Cade's absence. But I think for Pistons fans, the tough part about this all is that, while it's true, the Rockets a couple of years ago won a 20-game losing streak, and the Magic last year started 5-20. Those were teams trying to lose. This Piston team thought they were going to win games.
Mhm.
Number 1, I don't think Troy Weaver is the GM. I don't To me, it kind of reminds me of when I started playing 2K and I would just stack the deck of lottery picks like Zion, Ja, and RJ Barrett all into the same team when I was like 16 years old. And I was like, this is gonna be amazing in 2K, but they just don't know how to actually develop this Cade Cunningham experience with shooters. And their approach to doing so was, we're just going to be a really physical team with Isaiah Stewart at the 4. And Beef Stew is a really solid shooter at the 5, but he's not an NBA starting center. He's more of like your third big. And the idea that the way we're going to maximize Cade and learn who he is as a player is by playing with 3 non-shooters is really the issue. Like, that's not acceptable. In college, that's barely acceptable. And now, Cade, I think there's a chance he could be the first ever young star, the first ever first or let me repeat myself. I think Cade Cunningham could be the first overall pick to decline the rookie scale extension, to leave leaving the franchise that took him, taking less money just to get out of Detroit.
Wow. I don't think you're off base right there. I mean, I don't know why a kid would want to stay in Detroit. It's just an awful situation all around, and I think his career is taking a huge hit just being there. This team is going to be hard to fix. It really is. Now, before the podcast, you wanted to talk about Joel Embiid, and this is where we could talk about him
Mhm.
because after winning MVP, it feels like he's one upping himself again. He's averaging
Oh, yeah.
35 this year, 12 rebounds, 6 assists, career high in assists per game.
Yeah.
Joel Embiid has been the best player in the NBA this season. I mean, I don't think you can argue against it. He's been the best in the NBA. And the discourse around him is a little bit weird because I think all fans tend to focus in on is the free throw shooting. If you were to take away every free throw he's made this year, he would still average 24.9 points per game, 25 a game, which at this point would be good for 17th in the NBA. And that's being unfair to him because for people to be so dense and thinking that a 7 foot, near 300-pound player who moves like Embiid is not getting fouled at least 4 to 8 times a game, if not more, is pretty ridiculous. I think whenever players score at a high rate and they get to the free throw line, it always becomes bigger than what it needs to be. SGA is a foul merchant. Luca complains about calls. Like with all these great scorers, you hear the same thing. If you go down the list of all-time scoring seasons, whether it was Kobe Bryant in 2005 averaging 35, James Harden in 2019, averaging 35, 36 a game. They all took a lot of free throws. Allen Iverson, MVP season, he took a ton of free throws. Like they're all taking the same amount of free throws. And I think it's just a wake up call for people to be like, yeah, if you score a lot of points, you're probably getting to the line a lot. And that's just what it is. The fact that Joel Embiid has been knocked for it, I think is pretty ridiculous. I don't know why it's happening. He has these clips where he flops into players' legs, and that's understandable. I don't co-sign that type of behavior, but people take that one clip and they use that one clip to form a narrative while ignoring the other 30 ways that he's scoring and he's getting actual respectable buckets. He
Right.
just put 51 on the first ranked defense in the NBA. I mean, Joel Embiid is on a different level right now, and you can credit Nick Nurse for coming in and bringing his offensive philosophy. This does feel like a different Sixers team. It does feel like a team that in an Eastern Conference where the best two talented teams are coached by Joe Mazzulla and Adrian Griffin. this is a
Yeah,
wide open East for the Sixers
definitely.
to take over.
You made a great point with the majority of Joel Embiid's buckets off of free throws are total fouls, but the NBA is officiated differently than high school or college, where if a guy doesn't have his feet set and he touches Joel Embiid, it's going to be a whistle, and that's a reasonable one. The reason why people criticize him, which is probably about 3 of his free throw attempts, he takes 12 a game, so a quarter of them are ones where he is foul baiting, much like a Trae Young back in 2021. And when you see a 7-footer who's 280 pounds flying to the floor, that led to Danny Green's injury a couple of years ago, I believe. A lot of the time, it looks ridiculous because it is. And the playoffs, when that's taken away from a guy like Joel, then some of those possessions just become like dead ends. But I think Joel Embiid right now deserves a lot more credit because this is the best he's ever looked to start a season. I've been very critical of Joel, but one of the reasons why is that he usually has to play himself into shape. But this year he's been staying on business. This is the best shape he's been in. He's been playing way more explosive. Defensively, he's playing well, but the bigger thing is on offense, he doesn't have to put the ball on the floor as often. The other night was one of his best shooting games of his career versus the Timberwolves, where he was making everything. But the less he puts the ball on the floor and puts his head down, and the more he's passing before the double team comes, the way more diverse the Sixers offense becomes. And the playmaking to me is not only a byproduct of Nick Nurse's just emphasis on that. It kind of feels a bit like Wilt Chamberlain when he was scoring 50 a game. Alex Hannum comes in and the player's mindset shifts out of isolation into just making the right play consistently. And that's when Wilt Chamberlain finally got a championship in 1967. So, as somebody that's really waiting for Joel to finally have that complete playoff run to establish himself as like a top 5 player and MVP, because last year I felt like it was Jokic. This year it is clearly Joel. 35 points per game is one thing, but he's averaging more points than he is minutes per game. And he's been so dominant that he hasn't even played in half of their fourth quarters. And even if it's against teams like the Wizards and the Pacers, just Swiss cheese defenses, he just did against Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, and one of the more complete perimeter defenses as well. So you can't even use that. It was the second 50-point game this month. He deserves credit because, quite frankly, he's taken his game to a higher level. And he's fixed, he's corrected so far 2 of his 3 issues: the conditioning early in the season, the playmaking, the conditioning is so underrated, I think, for a young center. And one more reason why I think he is kind of criticized a lot. Giannis gets the foul line a ton as well. What he does is illegal. What he does is he takes his forearm, and because a defender can't do this and the offensive player can, he will just, you saw against the Knicks with Julius Randle, shove somebody out of the way by almost fully extending, occasionally be called a foul. That to me is illegal. When Embiid does its point guard light, it is a bit, unorthodox, but I don't think it's illegal in the way that a Giannis can do it. And so you're always going to have a complaint about free throws, but it's not very enjoyable to watch. But at the end of the day, I mean, I'm enjoying watching Embiid if he's making the shots, and that's where he's right now. You can make a case Joel Embiid's like a top 10 regular season scorer, top 5, top 3, because 35 points per game is that's the highest we've seen for a center since Willis Reed and Shaq. It's more than Shaq. And in today's era, he's benefited from spacing. But even still, I mean, to consider how consistently he's done it in October and November, if this is what he's going to look like to start the year, there's a chance he's averaging more than 35. There's a chance he's averaging 37 or 36 points per game. And that would be the most since Kobe Bryant in 2006. So
I said it last year when we had an episode that if Embiid didn't win an MVP, it would be the best 3-year stretch from a player in history where they didn't win MVP. He did win MVP, so now, we don't have to worry about that. But what he's doing in this 4-year stretch is one of the best 4-year stretches we've seen from a player. It hasn't been validated because he hasn't had a playoff run to
yeah,
validate his success yet. But that brings me to kind of 2 overbearing questions that need to be asked. One of them is, can the Sixers make a deep playoff run and get to the finals? And number 2 is, when you look at the Sixers and you look at how much Embiid is scoring, you look at the history of great scoring seasons, whether it was Kobe Bryant in '05, James Harden as recently in 2019. I mean,
Right.
how many times do we see a player score 35 in a regular season per game and their team goes to the finals? Because at that point, you're talking about a bit of a talent gap. The difference, though, is that I think Kobe Bryant, when he averaged that much, the talent was clear. He didn't have it. James
Right.
Harden, there were injuries to his team, and they lost Trevor Ariza that year, and he was their 3-and-D wing stopper. With
Mhm.
the Sixers, you look at the team and you're like, Embiid is averaging 35, but the Sixers also weirdly have a lot of talent as well.
Mainly Tyrese Maxey. I mean, his breakouts put him into that conversation of Jamal Murray. And the only difference is that Murray has been a superstar in the postseason, but in the regular season, this is like Tyrese Maxey for a third straight year being this elite pull-up shooter. And he's also grown in two of his biggest areas of need, isolation scoring and general playmaking. So I think the big question for the Sixers is because I think right now they're in a position to go to the conference finals. Now they need Embiid to be healthy, which is a big question. But if they get a on-ball defender like OG Anunoby, I think there's an arms race between them, the Dallas Mavericks in the West, and then a couple of smaller contenders. Whatever team gets him, they're going to instantly get Andrew Wiggins type of player, but like Wiggins from 2 years ago, not Wiggins from today. But he's an even better on-ball defender than Wiggins. He is a 40% three-point shooter. If you put OG Anunoby with Tyrese and their pretty damn good bench, I think the Sixers could have a case as a, I'm not going to say they're a favorite to go to the finals, but I think they have a case to beat the Bucks in a 7-game series and probably take the Celtics to six games. I think the Celtics should still be favorites by a game and a half.
I'm not sold on any team in the East. I'm not sold on the Bucks. The offensive pairing between Giannis and Dame has been amazing. That is working. The defense is still a very big concern, and I'm not sold on Adrian Griffin. With the Celtics, the Joe Mazzulla point is there. I'm not sold on him. And how sold are you on Jason Tatum being the guy? Like, to me, I love Tatum. I do love his game. I think
Do you?
yes, I think he's a great player.
Really?
I just think that he gets propped up in conversations he doesn't deserve to be in. I don't think he's in a conversation with Luca as,
Kawhi?
who's a better player. I don't think he's in a conversation with Kawhi fully healthy. I think Kawhi is better than Tatum. I mean,
What if you're including durability?
durability is a conversation, but when we're talking about both of them at their best, healthy, it's not a conversation. Kawhi's better. And this has been the healthiest Kawhi's looked in a very long time, and he's playing like it as well. There's just certain inefficiencies in Tatum's game that holds him back. The biggest one being his pull-up shooting. He settles for far too many three-point pull-up shots, and he doesn't make enough of them. He's one of the worst three-point pull-up shooters with volume in the league. And I think when your shot diet is relying on those type of shots, it makes it hard to project sometimes in the playoffs how far he can really go. Now, I know he can catch fire and have a great game in game 7. I've seen great moments from Tatum, but we've also seen disappearing Houdini acts from Jason Tatum as
Mhm.
well. But I think every team in the East has a concern. The Bucks is their defense, the Celtics, it's mainly Joe Mazzulla. And sometimes the most talented team doesn't always win. And
Right.
usually it's because of the coaching at the top. With the Sixers, it's Embiid's health. That's the biggest knock on him. And the fourth quarters, if Embiid's going to be gassed, how he's going to perform in those. And I think with every team in the East, there's a question mark. The only team that doesn't have much of a question mark are the Heat,
Well,
but
they've got
their question mark is talent. That's really the question mark. It's they have a lack of talent. But if they had more talent, if they had a Drew Holiday or a Dame on the team, then I wouldn't really have any question marks about them. So I think the East is wide open, and I don't know why people are so hesitant to leave the Sixers out of the conversation just because of the Celtics and the Bucks and what they have.
it's really funny. I feel like the Celtics are the Eagles to make an NFL comparison, and the Sixers the Cowboys. Jason Tatum is a little bit like Jalen Hurts, where it's like To add color to your point, he shoots 29% on pull-up threes. But on catch and shoot threes, he shoots 45%. He's always been, dating back to his rookie year, a lights out shooter off the catch because it was form and the release. It's really one of the more pretty shots. But the mid range part of his game, it's marginally improved to 42% this year. And you've seen him working with Sam Cassell and whatnot, but he's still not a mid range shot creator when he needs to be. Now, I would rather have him than Joel Embiid just because I trust him in the postseason to will his team there when it's not pretty. And with the Miami Heat point, you are very right because with Jaime Jaquez being like one of the top 3 rookies, top 4 in the NBA right now, they basically have like a miniature version of Jimmy and a long bench of guys who are going to fit into Eric Spoelstra's system. And when you look at Eric Spoelstra and Nick Nurse, they're far and away the 2 best coaches in the Eastern Conference playoff bracket. So if their star talent may not be viewed as highly as the Celtics and the Bucks, could we see for a third time in 4 years coaching be the deciding factor in a series being won in a fashion which is not like I had the Heat last year going to the finals once they beat the Bucks in round 1. Not many people did. And then Eric Spoelstra won in round 2 versus the Knicks and round 3 versus Celtics. Could we see that a second time? That's going to be the biggest story in the Eastern Conference this season.
I think we could. I mean, when the Celtics made the finals, it was because they had Ime Udoka. I mean, they had a way better coach.
It's amazing.
The Eastern Conference Finals, it feels like people are just saying it's the Bucks and the Celtics, but it could very well be the Heat and the Sixers. The 2 best coached teams in the East could be the ones to get there. And I think the Heat match up better with the Celtics, and I think the Sixers match up better with the Bucks in a series like that.
Without a doubt.
The Celtics also, I love that they got Drew Holiday, but Drew Holiday, they're finding out is not a natural playmaker. They're still relying on other players on the team to take leaps, and Jaylen Brown has taken a playmaking leap. It hasn't been substantial, but he's taken one. So I think the word with them is just their offense can get stagnant at times, and I just don't know how it's going to look. I think the East is wide open, and I think the West is wide open too. And the West right now, it feels like there's kind of a shift in power where in recent years it was the older players taking over in the West, where you have LeBron winning in the bubble, Steph Curry winning in 2022, Jokic recently with a healthy team wins in his prime. And now it feels like the power is kind of shifting where we see Minnesota as the first seed. We see OKC as a second seed. It feels like these younger teams are taking over while we have teams like the Lakers and the Suns as a 9th and 10th seed. The Lakers just won an in-season tournament, but they've been on a losing streak since then.
It came over.
And I want to start with the Lakers because I don't know about you, John, but I don't think the Lakers are contenders. I don't think they're true contenders. And, we talk about ranking the top 4 teams in the West. And whenever you rank teams in the West, people automatically prop the Lakers in there because of LeBron and Anthony Davis. But when you look at them as a team, I mean, to be a team that's not taking 3-point shots and not only not taking them, but not good at 3-point shooting,
25th.
I just don't see how you can make it to the finals when the personnel isn't there for spacing. That's my knock with the Lakers, where I think there's just too many spacing issues to overcome with them.
So they're 28th this year in 3-point attempts and 3-point makes, but they're also 28th in, actually 29th, Joel, is offensive rebounding. With LeBron James and Anthony Davis, you would think you'd be a very good offensive rebounding team because they're one of the most physical front court tandems in the NBA. But this Lakers team's identity is not consistent down the board. D'Angelo Russell is the complete opposite of those 2 players. Yesterday, he had the quotes, "That's not what I do," in reference to his defense. And I actually don't think that's the main problem because he's playing very well offensively. But with Vando being out the start of the year, Gabe Vincent being out the start of the year, those are 2 of their most gritty role players. And so that identity of the Lakers to win ugly while having just enough shooting is not something that's going to be fluid across their starting lineup. And the other part, which this is why it matters, they don't have many two-way players or complete players in the roster. Everybody's got a unique hole. Austin Reeves is like the perfect connector. He's kind of like a baby Franz Wagner, but he's not the mid-range shot creator or the one-on-one. He's a very efficient mid-range scorer, but he's not the one-on-one creator or number one initiator. In this stage of LeBron's career, he's not the primary initiator. D'Lo, at times in the regular season, at home, when his three-point shots are going in, can be a great floor raiser, a great facilitator. But when things are getting physical, he oftentimes disappears. So I'm still in belief the Lakers are a top 4 team in the Western Conference because when Anthony Davis is on the floor, they are a top 5 defense, top 10 defense at worst. Without Vando, they're 9th right now. And he just came back recently. But if Anthony Davis gets hurt, which is always a possibility, this team's year is more than over because their bench has no rim protector. And defensively, they're so reliant on him to be the floor raiser of everything that, they really are like one injury, one thread away from being in a very similar situation in 2021 when they fell to the 7th seed. At the same time, while that is true, you look at where the Lakers were this time last year, where Benchbrook was the most exciting thing going on when he was like the 12th best sixth man in basketball, and you compare that to now, and their bench is filled with many more good rotation players, but not a lot of them are those high level, you can fit them into any sort of closing lineup rotation players that they're looking for. I think the right type of guy for the Lakers would be a Malcolm Brogdon who's physical enough to hold up in that setting. He's capable enough defensively to fill into any lineup, but is also a good enough scorer and shot creator. I think at the deadline, that would be the right move for them.
Now, I'm going to stop you right there because with injury, I feel like with the West, that's anything, right? I mean, if Rudy Gobert goes down for the Timberwolves or Cat, or for OKC, it's Chet, or for the Nuggets, it's Michael Porter Jr. or Jamal Murray for even more time. We saw them struggle when Murray did go out this year. I mean, you can go down a list of every West team and say the same thing. With the Lakers, really, it's that Cam Reddish is now in the starting lineup. He's a great defender, but in the playoffs, will his lack of shooting be detrimental to the team? Vando, we have seen, cannot really play in the playoffs for an extended period of time. So it seems like
big one.
Their best defensive lineups cannot play together in the postseason. And I'm just not a believer in non-shooting teams. I know when the Lakers won in the bubble, they weren't the best three-point shooting team, but I felt like that team was a little bit different because I think that team was able to overwhelm teams with Anthony Davis and LeBron, and they were just much bigger. Where now you see teams in the West that they can shoot, but they also have size. So you can kind of counteract the Lakers' size. The other team that's struggling is the Suns, and Bradley Beal's hurt again. He injured his ankle. My goodness. I think I had much higher expectations for the Suns. Of course I did. I thought the bench would be better. But Yuta Watanabe is inconsistent as a shooter. Keita Bates-Diop is shooting 23% from three. Jordan Goodwin has been all right, nothing special. He's been kind of the best all-around player off the bench, but he can't shoot consistently. I think the problem with the team is that I don't think Devin Booker's playing his natural position. Like, we know he's a two guard, and I hate to pin this all on Devin Booker, but when I look back on the Suns and I look at when they play and their fourth quarter struggles, it's not that they can't keep up with teams because they can, but in the fourth quarter, when you need to slow down possessions, it feels like Devin Booker's going a little bit too fast. It feels like Devin Booker, with 18 seconds left on the shot clock, is shooting a top of the key three instead of getting a better shot. I was watching the Nets game live the other night when Mikal and Cam Johnson came back to Phoenix, and that fourth quarter was just a bunch of settling from Kevin Durant, from Devin Booker. And if Devin Booker is going to embrace being the full-time point guard, then he has to stop shot hunting at the times that he's shot hunting at. And he has to play more within the flow of the offense. And then it comes back to Frank Vogel because, after a timeout when the Nets were down by 3 points, the shot that happened was Devin Booker at the top of the key, where it's like if you had an entire timeout to draw a play And the play was give it to Booker, everybody ISO spread out, and let me take a shot. I mean, if you're drawing a play after the timeout, it has to be better than that. So I think with the Suns, you can look to the coaching offensively. Frank Vogel has never been an offensive coach. We know his bread and butter is on defense. You look at the lack of shooting on this team. I actually think Nurkic has been fine. I don't think he's been an issue for them. He's actually been one of the bright spots for them. Bradley Beal's injury, and I think Devin Booker, the box and raw numbers will be there for him with assists. But I just think when you look at how the flow of the game is going, he is not a player that can control the pace of a game.
It's very weird to have the playmaker discussion with Devin Booker, mainly because he's not supposed to be doing this much, this early, this often. And when the Suns acquired Jordan Goodwin, my idea was they're going to have 3 other ball handlers. Right now, they've really only got 1. The Suns' best lineup, and this lineup is filthy, they're plus 30 this year, is Grayson Allen, who's shooting the cover off the ball to start this year, kind of like Damian Lee last year, I'm not going to lie to you. Eric Gordon, KD, D-Book, and then Yusuf Nurkic. They've got a 100 defensive rating, one of the best offensive ratings because you're putting lethal shooting on each corner, and then 2 dynamic shot creators. Kevin Durant shooting very well, probably the high water mark for him and this entire unit as a whole. But the issue simply is because they hired Frank Vogel, the emphasis is Bradley Beal is your number 3. And at the same time, you want to have that third attack defense, secondary closeout type of score. That way, Kevin Durant's not doing too much either. The other question is their defense because Yusuf Nurkic is an adequate defender, but he's not an anchor on that side of the ball. So the more you ask KD to do on the defensive end as well, the more likely he and Dean Booker are going to be worn down in the playoffs. And it's very similar to those Spurs teams where they would rest and load manage all of their guys for the playoffs. That's how they were able to sweep the Cavaliers all the way back 15, 20 years ago. So the Suns really need to get one of those, all 3 of their stars together because I'm not worried about them being 1 game over 500. I'll be honest with you. The bench definitely has some shortcomings, but much like those Nets teams in 2021, if you have 2 adequate rotation players and a 7-man lineup, you're going to be fine. But if Beal's out, now you're really only going to have a 6 or 6.5-man lineup. And it feels very reductive, but that is the most important thing with the Suns team because they basically said this all season, we know the Denver Nuggets are going to be able to score on us, but we believe no team in the NBA will have enough perimeter defense to defend all 3, no team in the Western Conference specifically, of our star creators. And we're going to double down perimeter shooting. But they can't double down that identity if they only have 2 of those 3 guys.
That's the gamble they took. And you're right, because they trapped them. And when they trap Devin Booker or they trap Kevin Durant and they pass it out to another player, that third player is not the one that's able to create. You know, you see it a lot of times within their offense where D-Book gets doubled. He's passing it to Jordan Goodwin, and now Jordan Goodwin can't do anything with the ball. Where when Bradley Beal was healthy, when I saw him in his 30 minutes or so versus the Nets, when they would trap D-Book and Bradley Beal would come to the ball, now you have a one-on-one with Bradley Beal and somebody else, and he gets to a spot, he gets a basket pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think that is going to be major for them for just getting healthy. But you look at the team, like they're 17th in defensive rating, but they're 15th in opponents' points per game. They're 13th in offensive rating, 15th in points per game. Even with Bradley Beal being hurt, I think they should be a top 10 offense. I think the gamble on them is being a great offensive team. I think Bradley Beal, without Bradley Beal, they should be a top 10 offense. With Bradley Beal, we're talking about a top 5 offense. The fact that with D-Book and KD, they have not been able to be a top 10 offense, I think is the major issue. And they have to figure out their offensive problems sooner rather than later, because defensively, you're right. Like Nurkic is an inadequate defender, but I think he's been fine. I really do think he's been fine. I think the player that's been hurting them the most has been Drew Eubanks. I think his minutes have been, I mean, as soon as he's out there, you can just count on the opposing team making a run. So I think that's the Suns' major problem, and Bradley Beal is going to be reevaluated in a couple weeks. They face the Kings tonight, and I think that's going to be a high scoring affair. So we'll see who
Right.
comes out on top. But I think, when you don't have the roster to win these games without you having to do most of the work, I think that's when you as a player have to realize that you have to put the team on your back. I mean, we've seen players before do it. We saw James Harden in 2019 when Chris Paul and Capella go down. He does it. So I'm
Mhm.
still looking for Devin Booker to fully take over and go on a run in the regular season that is similar to what we saw him do in the playoffs, where listen, if your roster is not the roster that can compete right now because you have some injuries, you have to be the guy that just goes out there and drops 40. Because right now it feels like Kevin Durant is having that responsibility. And I think at his age, it's unfair to ask of him.
Right. There's one move that I'm going to mention him. I mentioned before. I feel like having a guard and a second ball handler off the bench that really can get downhill and gets all their shooters going again would be Markel Fultz, because part of why they're the 13th ranked offense is that they only have two creators and two ball handlers. And where the Mavericks have Luka Doncic, he is one of those rare engines who can make you so good offensively that it's okay to have two of them. And even they have Dante Exum, Jaden Hardy. The Suns don't necessarily have that connector. It's a lot of 3D wings like your Gordons, your Nasir Littles, Yuta Watanabe, Keita
Great
Bates
team.
Diop, and there's just not enough variability in all those role players to create for themselves. Taking D-Book off the ball, because once D-Book, much like a Jason Tatum, is playing off the catch, that's where he does some of his best damage. But having him exclusively as the point guard is where, yeah, he's going to put up better numbers. But the offense as a whole will be less effective.
Who are you more concerned about, the Lakers or the Suns?
I'm going to go with the Lakers personally. And the reason why is because I believe in the postseason, the Suns' only question mark will be their bench. The Lakers in the postseason have a lot of questions. D'Angelo Russell, that's a huge one. Anthony Davis being your go-to shot creator and initiator. Is that going to look pretty against burly, chiseled 7-footers who are going to defend it well at the post? And then the last question for me would be, as you mentioned, Vando, Vincent, Reddish. How do all those players fit in? Because you may not know this, but the Lakers this year are actually better, 16 points better per 100 possessions when Max Christie is in that fifth starter spot opposed to Cam Reddish. I don't know why that is, because he's actually shooting just as poorly, but I feel like the Lakers have more questions offensively.
I am more concerned about the Lakers too. I mean, actually, no, I'm not. I'm more concerned about the Suns. I think the Lakers have a pretty high floor. I think they do, just because they're the defense. They do something that's elite. I think with the Suns, the
Right.
concern is the fourth quarter offense, the injury right now to Bradley Beal. I'm more concerned about the Suns right now, I would say. If you're looking at the West right now, who do you think are, let's narrow it down to the three best teams in the West that you think what they're doing can also translate to the playoffs?
Number one, Nuggets. Number two, Oklahoma City.
Oh, John, you lost me.
They have the best perimeter defense in the West. At the guard position, you got Shea, Lou Dort, and Cason Wallace. And that is going to be so key against a team like the Suns. And also the Minnesota Timberwolves, because I know you're a big Ant guy. I'm a big Ant guy. I think Shea is the better player right now. He's the more consistent on-ball defender. He's the more, I would say, consistent in-between score when the jump shots are not
He's a
going in.
better offensive player right now
And
than
I
Ant.
also believe Chet and Jalen Williams. I'm taking Giddy out the equation. I don't think he should be starting. I don't think he's a good fit. I think he stagnates their offense, unfortunately. But Chet and Jalen Williams are basically perfect complementary pieces, especially in the postseason, I believe.
You think that the
Yeah.
trio defensively of Dort, SGA, and Cason Wallace is better than McDaniels, Nikhil Alexander Walker, and Anthony Edwards?
More consistently. I like
How is
McNeil
that
a lot
more
off the bench.
consistently?
Because Anthony Edwards, when he locks in, is a smothering on-ball defender. But I think Shea, with his rim protection at that size, how much he's bought into it, is right now a first-team All-League defender. And Cason Wallace, he can get moved around a little bit, but when you beat Cason off the dribble or Lou Dort, you've got Shea and help, and he's basically a wing. Jalen Williams is a wing. And their coaching with Mark Dagnall, it's a higher precedent for consistent activity on that side of the ball. Now, you do make a good point with Jane McDaniels. He's probably right now the best wing defender in basketball. But I believe those second and third defenders, or I actually just believe Shea is also an all-league defender like Jaden McDaniels. But I believe Cason Wallace and Lou Dort are at that level, so I would probably slightly lean with them.
I mean, Jaden McDaniels is a better defender than Lou Dort, though. And Nikhil Alexander Walker is a better defender than Kaysen.
It's pretty close.
No, it's not close. Nikhil Alexander Walker is 6'6" and can defend and can move laterally quickly.
He was the best matchup on Jamal Murray, and he's a very good on-ball defender. But I just feel like in help, they have a little bit more over there in Oklahoma City.
Well, in Minnesota, they have Rudy Gobert.
They do.
And Chet is not
talking about perimeter defense. Now you're
okay. I mean, sure, but like when you talk about, I mean, bro, when you talk about the defense and the help defense, the center obviously plays a role in help defense. And then we're also not even mentioning Mike Conley, who's a great defender, who has been a great defender this year.
Great defender at 35. He's a
bro. Very viable. TWolves enough. He's a great defender. Yes, he is. What are you talking about?
He's not what he was 7 years ago.
But
that's when he was.
When you talk about helping, you talk specifically about helping and rotations. Yeah. This year, Mike Conley has been elite at helping and on rotations. So what are we talking about? What are we talking
very good off the ball.
On ball, McDaniels and Nikhil Alexander Walker is a better duo than Lou Dort and Cason Wallace, bro. What are we doing?
I'm talking about Lou Dort and Shea. I think you're missing how good Shea this year is the first player since.
You're also missing how great of a defender Anthony Edwards is when he locks in. And in the playoffs,
when he locks in,
is he not going to lock in the playoffs though? Like, come on, let's be serious.
With that load he has, I'm not entirely sure how consistent.
What load? He doesn't have a use
to be the best player. He has to be just like Shea, the best player in every series. And what Shea is doing right now is Michael Jordan shit. 30 points per game and 2.5 steals is what Michael Jordan did. And that's what Shea has done for the better part of the last year.
So Shea has a bigger load than Anthony Edwards. Pause. Shea has a bigger load than Anthony Edwards, but you're not worried about the defensive drop off from him and him maintaining that defense. But you are with Edwards, who has a lesser load.
I think right now Shea is he's further along and he's a better player right now this season.
Okay. So who's your third team?
My third team? I think I'd have two. It'd be 3A, 3B, and it would be man. I want to say the Suns, and I want to say the Lakers, but damn, what's the other team that I'm forgetting?
The Clippers?
No. I'm gonna go with the Timberwolves.
You're just being biased now, John. You're just being biased now because the only reason you're saying it, you're saying no to the Clippers, is because you picked the Clippers to miss the playoffs.
Yes, I did.
That's why you're still trying to hold that hope that they're going to fall off. But come on, we knew that they were probably going to get James Harden when you made that prediction.
I just made under the assumption they weren't getting him.
Even if they didn't get him, they would have still been great.
I did not as good. That. Let's talk about the Clippers. I did not know coming into the season Kawhi was going to play 26 to 27 games to start, and that's been one of my biggest surprises because the Clippers have a couple of issues. Probably the biggest is availability and continuity. So with the theory of Los Angeles, it is amazing. Let's be clear. The trio that they have,
they're on a 10-game win streak.
They were on a 9-game.
That's not a theory.
They were on a 9-game win streak in the regular season. But this is also a team that blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in their first playoff run together. Yes, when the Nuggets were in their second playoff run together. And the last 2 years, they have not put together a consistent full season of high-level basketball. And a 9-game winning streak in December to me is not going to be enough for me to put them into that top 4.
After that, though, they made the WCF with Kawhi Leonard being hurt and took.
And that was when they had the best supporting cast possible around Paul George.
They still have a great supporting cast, though.
Offensively,
who are the? Oh my God, John! All right, listen.
Let me hear your point. Let me hear your take on the Clippers being a top 3 team in the Western Conference.
Well, right now they're clearly a top 3 team in the Western Conference with how they're playing. They're playing amazing basketball.
The
They're the
playoffs.
first.
That was the
They're the
question you
first
asked.
ranked offense. I mean, when we talk about the playoffs and you talk about Kawhi Leonard, then you don't have much question marks. You trust the Suns over the Clippers?
This sounds crazy, but I trust them to be healthy more, which is not saying a whole lot.
You trust them to be healthy more when Bradley Beal is already injured and he's going to be out for 2 weeks.
I trust Devin Booker to be healthier more than Kawhi, and
You
I
trust Devin
Durant
Booker more in
the same way.
elimination games than Kawhi Leonard?
Well, it's tough to know because Kawhi Leonard's never able to even get to them. So either way, I'd rather have Devin Booker shit the bed in an elimination game than Kawhi Leonard likely not.
That makes no sense. Kawhi Leonard is a 2-time NBA champion. He's obviously gone into elimination games before.
He was a 2-time Finals MVP in 2014, 2019. That's
2019 is not that long ago, bro. It's not that long ago. And Kawhi Leonard this year has played every game in the regular season. Last time he did that was in a 2016 NBA season. This is his healthiest year that he's had in a long time. He looks healthy, and he's playing at an elite level.
Now, he didn't play last night when they lost by 20 to the Thunder. But.
Now, listen, I want to tell you something, John. Obviously, this Thunder lore, I think the Thunder are great. I think they're a year away. This is not going to be the year. The Timberwolves are better than the Thunder. That's where you went wrong. First of all, the Timberwolves are better than the Thunder. Yes, they are. And you saw them in the play-in matchup last season. The Timberwolves beat the brakes off them. The difference in that matchup is the front court because Gobert can overpower Chet Holmgren. Because Chet Holmgren, as great as he is, he's still a little bit on the skinnier side. He can't match up with somebody like Gobert on the boards, especially. And they don't have an answer for Cat. Cat can dominate that series, and that's an X factor in that series. When you have McDaniels, Alexander Walker, Anthony Edwards, and Conley being your perimeter defenders, you will be fine.
I got news for you, though, bud. Karl Anthony Towns dominating that series, I'm not so sure about that. Because in today's NBA, the best matchup for a guy like Cat, who super skilled shooter, had the most efficient year so far in the last couple of seasons, is a wing that's able to get underneath him, is able to take away the drives like Jalen Williams. I think that would be the toughest possible matchup for Towns.
You think Jalen Williams is the toughest possible matchup for Cat? Are you high?
Aaron Gordon was the best possible matchup for him last year, and that's the same.
Aaron Gordon is not Jalen Williams. I mean, Jalen Williams is not Aaron Gordon.
An athletic 6'8" wing. He's not as strong as AG. He doesn't have the same upper body. But the lower body, the lower center of gravity, absolutely. It's right.
Well, obviously, what do you mean? He's just simple as not as strong as Aaron Gordon. If you're not as strong as Aaron Gordon, you're going to get pushed around by somebody like Cat. Cat would push around Jalen Williams.
Cat ain't pushing around nobody, brother.
There's a reason why in the play-in, Cat went absolutely ballistic against OKC because they had nobody to cover him.
Just like D'Angelo.
Did Jalen Williams not play in that play-in game? Did he not play in it?
He did. He was also
he did. And what did he do? He got cooked. Cat cooked him. So what we're talking about, John. You're driving me nuts right now because you're trying to discredit Timberwolves.
You're referencing a playing game which is stored into the depths of the internet. It's one playing game from a year ago.
The Timberwolves match up better with OKC. Did you see their matchup earlier this season when Anthony Edwards got hurt and got injured and a fully healthy OKC team couldn't beat Minnesota? Did you see that game? What about that game, John?
Here's what I'll tell you. You've convinced me to put the Timberwolves above the Thunder at 3, but to say Cat's going to cook Oklahoma City in that series, I don't agree with that part.
The X factors in the
front. You know what? I'll agree with you. I think Minnesota is too right now with how high of a floor they've set.
The X factor is in the front court. That's all I'm saying. And I think Cat, yes, he can have a dominant series. And this is why I was always against trading Cat because he's an all-star. He's been an all-NBA player before. You need talent to win in the NBA. And if they get the best version of Cat, which right now it seems like this is the best version of Cat on this type of squad, then you got a chance against anybody. And listen, I like the Timberwolves, and people may take this as me being biased a homer or being a homer. Listen, I love OKC. I think the Timberwolves match up better with OKC. Can SGA be the difference? SGA is remarkably great. I'm not going to count that. I'm not going to discount that. But when you have defenders like Jaden McDaniels, when you have somebody like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's been an excellent defender, I think that's a good matchup. You can at least slow him down just a little bit. And outside of SGA, you're relying on a second year Chet Holmgren, who's really in his
Right.
rookie season, and Jalen Williams, who I love, but I mean, they're still young. I think the Timberwolves just have that veteran experience over them, just players that are older that have been there before. That's what I
Mm.
think they have. They have that advantage over OKC, John. That's all I'm saying.
I think the veteran experience part's overblown because while the Timberwolves this year have a incredible defense that ranks first in points per game allowed and efficiency, their offense is still second half of the NBA. And I feel like offensively, there's more continuity and congruence with this core in Oklahoma City, that they fit better together. With the Cat point you made, I actually agree. They do need that level of shot creation. And Cat this year, 42% from 3-point land, averaging 22 points per game. He's fit within this core that they've built from last year without him very well. 52% from the field and 55% on twos. But even with Cat and Anthony Edwards at the current level they're at, they rank 17th in points per game and 17th in efficiency. And when I look at Oklahoma City, they rank 6th in points per game. Sorry, my eyes are blurry. I think it's 5th. Yes, they rank 5th in points per game and 6th in offensive rating with a 119 mark. I believe Oklahoma City with a top 3 net rating +7, that's higher than the Celtics team last year that won 57 games. And with their coach, Mark Dagnall, who's done a tremendous job since coming in here in 2020, yes, they have a just as deep bench, and these teams have great benches altogether. But I do think in that 7-game series, Shea would be the slightly better player than Anthony Edwards. But here's the thing, I love both of these players, so it's like picking between a rock and a hard place. I ultimately think Shea at 25 years old, having also been in 2 playoff series, just like Anthony Edwards, is just further along right now than Ant, who's only 22. And so I think that is where, you know what, Joel? I actually think the Thunder are more prepared. And it's because I think their star is going to be just as special, but just a little bit more on the defensive end, truthfully. And that's where you start to rest your mark. You're like, Anthony Edwards can be the best perimeter defender in the league. Well, so can Shea. And he doesn't get enough love for that.
If you compare Anthony Edwards' first 2 playoff appearances versus Shea's, it's not even close. And Shea,
Oh,
I
right.
understand.
I wonder why. Because Shea was the third piece in his offense. No kidding. When he was a rookie at
Shea,
19 years old,
Shea,
yeah, he played a smaller role, and he still averaged 19 and
Shea
14
in
on
his first
incredible
season was a
efficiency.
rookie. I'll take that away. When SGA was an OKC, he was the second option. Let's stop the cap. Let's stop the bullshit, John.
There's a
It
2A,
was
2B.
it was CP3 and it was SGA. The
And
only
Gallo.
reason why in that series versus the Rockets in the bubble, SGA started being a third option was because Dennis Schroeder came in off the bench and played better than him. SGA in that series struggled. He didn't play that well. The numbers may fool you a bit, but he didn't play that well. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt though, because SGA has not been in the playoffs since he's been a star. But
Right.
I've seen Edwards in the playoffs. I've seen him drop 31 points per game in the playoffs. I mean, Anthony Edwards takes it to a different level in the playoffs. There's the
Sure.
reason why we elevate Edwards in these talks, and that's because in the playoffs, he turns it up to a different level. And I think he'll do just the same if he meets OKC in the first round. Come on, who are we kidding? It's Anthony Edwards, John.
The good news is that these two teams ain't going to match up in the first round because they're going to be top 3 seeds. But when you said that Dennis Schroeder was better, Shea struggled in games 1-5, but in game 7 specifically, when Dennis Schroeder was 5-17 from the field and struggling off the bench, it was Shea who was playing way more in rhythm within their offense.
I mean, game 7, it was
that elimination game is where everything rests. That's what matters most.
Game 7 was the best game Lou Dort had. He was the best player in game 7. Lou Dort was. It wasn't SGA.
Fire.
It wasn't
But
SGA.
It was Lou Dort, it was CP3 and Shea as that 1 through 3. Perfect. They almost took your boy Harden out. That would have been a very low bar crew.
Yeah, but then Harden got the block. So I'll bet you respect Harden. Now listen.
Oh yeah, and they lost.
I'll give my top 3 teams in the West.
Let's hear it.
You got to give respect to the Denver Nuggets and what they will be when they're healthy. Number 2 is the Timberwolves. There's a reason why Bruce Brown has went on podcast and he said the Timberwolves were the toughest matchup. He said they were the toughest matchup. Everybody knows Minnesota's coming. In regards to OKC, I respect the hell out of OKC. But if they make when they make the playoffs this year, this is going to be their first time in the playoffs. It's going to be their first time. It's going to be their first time as this core. How likely is it that their first time in the playoffs with this core, they make it to the WCF? I mean, let's be real. Like, if OKC, I think if they get a bad matchup versus the Clippers in the first round, that's a toss-up, John. Let's not act like the Clippers are gonna just fall over and lose that
Right.
series. Kawhi could very well shut down SGA in that series. Let's not act like it can't
Yeah.
happen. Or I would say not shut down, but Kawhi could outplay SGA in that
Yeah.
series. Let's not act like it can't happen, John. So number 3 to me, and I've been a little bit skeptical, like you, on the Clippers because of the continuity and the fit and the Harden drama and the injuries. But
In the playoff
when you
game.
look at how they've been playing as recently, last 10 games, they've been the number 1 offense in the NBA. I think the injury concern, if you want to bring it to me, you have a valid point. But continuity, I'm not going to let you get away with it because clearly, since Harden has become the point guard, the full-time point guard, and has taken over and has been the offense, their continuity has been just fine. Harden's averaging 20 and 10. Kawhi is averaging 28 points per game. Paul George has been healthy in some of those games, and he's played very well. Russell Westbrook's playing better off the bench. Ivica Zubac is having, you could argue, his best season. The continuity has been just fine. So I'm not going to let you get away with that point, John. The continuity has been there for the Clippers. So I would put the Clippers at 3. I think the Clippers earn that respect. And we always want to have these injury concerns with the Clippers. That's valid, and I understand that. But if I'm going off of being healthy, I think the Clippers deserve that spot.
So my question with them, because Terrence Mann coming back has been very key on the defensive end. He came back right as Harden was brought in, and they will absolutely need Terrence Mann to be one of their 5 players. I'm not so sure that Kawhi and PG, they can, and also Harden are all going to continue shooting 43% from three-point land. And when those shots aren't going in, the way it looked when they lost 7 straight games, how is their offense going to look when Terrence Mann's making 23% of them? Because for his career, he only takes 2 attempts per game. I don't think offensively they have as clear an identity as this 9-game winning streak would indicate, because it's still very early on. We're talking about 17 games with James Harden or whatnot. And in the postseason, I think they could give a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder a tough round 1 matchup, because that's the most likely Kawhi will be healthy. If Kawhi goes down, which I think is far more likely than any star, unfortunately, in the Western Conference, their year is over. And with Kawhi's body, I think it is the biggest red flag in the Western Conference, which I'm not sipping the Kool-Aid with them personally. And you can, but history would say that's a risky move, especially because he's non-San Antonio and he's non-Toronto anymore. I think this Clippers team, quite frankly, is holding together because they're building a new arena. And that's a good reason. For the postseason, I really am not going to get caught up in some December wins, though I think it puts them in the contender tier. I can't put them above the Lakers right now. I'm a way more optimistic on their long-term viability. I'm also not going to put them above the Suns.
Okay, John, you lost me, and the reason why you lost me is because you mentioned they've been shooting great on his win streak. Kawhi Leonard 43% from 3, Paul George 43% from 3. That's what you said, right? That's what you said. James Harden too. What is he shooting? 43%.
43% from deep.
Okay. Is Kawhi Leonard not a 40% 3-point shooter?
Close to it.
Close to it. How about you check the numbers? Is Paul George not a above 38% 3-point shooter?
He's at 40%.
He's at 40% career.
Yeah.
Paul George. Is James Harden, when he hasn't had the dominant on-ball responsibilities that he had in Houston, not an above 38% 3-point shooter? What did he shoot last year with Philadelphia in the entire season?
He shot 38. The year before, he shot 33. And the year before that, he shot 36 in 2021. And just knowing James Harden, after the 2020 season with Russell Westbrook, because that was the year they played well together, he has not been one to embrace an off-ball catch and shoot role. He has at times. He did last year. He had a big game winner that way. And he has this year to start. But I'm not so sure in the postseason if he's going to continue embracing that role, because in his entire career, he's been hardwired to play one way. And that's totally independent off the ball. So I need to see it for a full year to really believe he's going to embrace it.
James Harden is
We're talking about James Harden, Joel.
James Harden is a career 40% catch and shoot player. He is. So when we talking about these shooting
Yeah,
splits you're
check.
bringing to me,
I'll
it's
double check
not
that
like
out.
it's not like it's they shooting 55% like the Miami Heat in the first round versus the Bucks. It's not like it's that way. So let me get this straight, because last year you was very high on the Heat in the playoff front, and when I told you the
Right.
first round, I thought it was a little bit fluky because they're shooting 55% from three. You told me, oh no, but they're still great shooters. They can sustain this, but somehow 43% for the Clippers to sustain is too much. What are
The
we
main
talking
reason
about,
why
John?
I was a believer in the Heat was kind of their star and their coach. And I think Kawhi is a top 5 player when ranking guys.
Kawhi's better than
I
Jimmy.
don't I don't think he's a top 5 guy when it comes to leading a team to the finals in this stage of his
He's
career.
done it. He's done it before.
Yeah, before his knees were completely
And right
gone.
now, he's the healthiest he's been in a long time. I'm not saying that he's gonna do it, but based on his play with the Clippers this year, have you seen? Oh man, Kawhi is not the same. I mean,
He's getting right back to that level he's at the end last year. And I'm like, damn, Kawhi looks like a top 3 player in the world right now. And he's only missed 5 games after the new year. And then he tears his meniscus after
you
40
trust
40
Mark
minutes in the
Dano more than
playoffs.
Tyronn Lue?
I would say it's pretty similar. They're in a
You're
similar
crazy.
tier.
You're crazy, John. You're crazy.
No, so
You're crazy if you trust Mark Dano over
I've
Tyronn Lue.
always felt like Tyronn Lue's jaded and kind of tired of this sequence with stars not being available. And I also feel like he's half out the door, half in the door. And I believe with Mark Dagnall, there's just a higher culture and chemistry between his players, which is a byproduct of coaching.
You mean the coach who's still starting Josh Giddey despite all numbers showing that their offense is a complete abomination with Josh Giddey still on the floor? That coach,
You and I know one thing. They're going to have to try
that
to
coach,
raise that trade value. They have to raise
that
that all
coach,
the way up
John.
they can.
So Josh Giddey having the worst true shooting percentage in the NBA right now is raising his trade value.
There's no right way to raise it.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Get out of here, John. Trusting Mark Dagnall over Tyronn Lue. What are you doing, man? What are you doing? How about you? How about you stop? How about you stop? You're sipping OKC Kool-Aid, which is fine. They're a young team, but don't disrespect the Clippers. Listen, I think the Clippers. The injuries are the only valid criticism you can actually have. That's it.
The only valid criticism you got with the Clippers is injuries. That's it.
Yes.
How about the 2020 bubble when they were both healthy? Oh, it's too hard. Is it being too hard also an excuse for them? Is James Harden being a consistent non-factor in high-level playoff games also a criticism, a concern? Are those? I want to know.
So all those concerns that you have for the Clippers, one, you mentioned 2020, you mentioned the bubble, but you refused to mention what happened after that when they made the WCF, even though Kawhi got hurt and he tore his ACL, which if he didn't get hurt, they might have made the finals that year. You refused to mention that, John.
Fluke in NBA history. People talk about the 2020 NBA playoffs being fraudulent. The Hawks and Clippers making the conference finals is really the Mickey Mouse playoff runs, because we're not going to say that ever again. That was the fake year where most of the stars were hurt because they did not have regular all seasons, and teams like the Heat and the Lakers were going to be hurt from the very start. 2020 was the fluky season, and that was just so happened to be the year Clippers made it to the conference finals. How else can you look me in the eyes and say, oh yeah, the Hawks are 2 games away from the NBA finals? Yeah, that's normal.
Okay, the Hawks, for one, the Hawks beat the Knicks, who Julius Randle was trash. And then they came back versus the Sixers. I'm not a big fan of the Hawks run. I think the Bucks run was more fluky because the Nets got hurt. Now, hold up, John. Let me talk. In the West, who did the Clippers face that was hurt?
The Suns.
In the WCF?
Oh, sorry, the conference finals. The first
who was hurt for the Suns?
Chris Paul was not 100%, was he?
He didn't play like it all the time, but Devin Booker was healthy. Mikal Bridges was healthy. DeAndre Ayton was healthy. I mean, if anything, people said the fluke was for the Suns because they faced a path of injuries with the Lakers, with the Nuggets, and then with the Clippers with no Kawhi. Yeah. That's the fluke. So who did the Clippers face that was injured in that playoff run since it was so fluky?
I'm trying to think who they played.
So you don't even know who they played, yet it was fluky. You have no recollection of who their opponents were, but it was fluky. Get out of here, John. Get out of here.
I'm trying to think of the right year because there have been a lot of different years. So let me pull it up. Do you know?
How about let me tell you? Yes, because I know on top of my brain, John. Okay. I don't even gotta look it up. First round, they faced the Dallas Mavericks.
Thank you.
That's who they
They
faced.
got taken to 7.
Second, I mean, that's Luka. You gonna disrespect Luka now? The
Well, it's
second
Luka with
round,
no help.
Jalen Brunson played, but he didn't play that well.
Jalen Brunson. Well, don't do that. Jalen Brunson got benched in that series for Trey Burke. What are you doing?
Why? Because he wasn't good in that series. That's why.
Right. And you mentioned Luka had no help when he took that Clippers team to 7. Second round, they played the Jazz. So
second round, they played the Jazz. They played the Jazz. Third round, they played the Suns, who were healthy.
Relatively, not entirely.
Relatively,
Paul, yeah. I just remembered Chris Paul had C19 going into the series, and he only played in 4 of the 6 games.
Okay, sure, but
not 100%.
Who in game 1 in that series, in the Suns and Clippers series, who had a great game?
Campaign was the best point guard on the floor. If
Campaign. So the guy who replaced Chris Paul had a game that rivaled Chris Paul.
That's game 2, though, Joel. Game 1, Campaign was all right. Game 2, it dropped 29, and that was the second win for the Suns to put them up 2-0.
Even when Chris Paul came back, what did he do versus the Bucks? I mean, what are you talking about, John? They still had Devin Booker. They still had DeAndre, and the Clippers are the team that didn't have Kawhi. They're the team that didn't have their star. So what are we talking about here? Ultimately, you are trying to knock the Clippers for their history. Mm-hmm. Okay, the bubble is valid. After the bubble, they made the WCF with Kawhi being hurt, and then they didn't make the playoffs because Kawhi was out the entire year. This past year, if Kawhi doesn't get hurt, we're talking about them possibly upsetting the Suns in the first round because Kawhi was outplaying D-Book and KD combined. He gets hurt. So that's where I go back to what I said. The only concern is injuries. That's the only concern. You want to use history to denounce the Clippers, but ultimately the OKC Thunder have no history to go off of. You are using a playoff setting to minimize the Clippers, but we seen the OKC Thunder in a play-in setting and not play well. So in a setting that's lesser than the playoff stage, which is more grand, they didn't live up to expectations, and they got blown out versus the Timberwolves.
You're using a 1-game sample size because the playing game before they dominated the Pelicans, which is a team you're high on coming in this year and you're high on a couple of weeks ago. But here's the other part. The Thunder are a better regular season team, and they're an unknown quality. They're also one of the youngest teams in the NBA, one of the more complete. As I said before, +7 net rating is phenomenal. Top 3 in the NBA, above the Timberwolves and only below 2 teams. The Clippers are a known quality. They are a known commodity in the playoffs. We know who James Harden is. We have a clear idea. Kawhi Leonard can't be trusted to be healthy. And we love Paul George in his game. But the reality is, Paul George, as number 1, has a ceiling when you don't have that same supporting cast they did. Nick Batum is not walking through those doors. Marcus Morris is not walking through those doors making 46% of his threes. And you know what? That was the differential for that Clippers team to be so completely dominating the Jazz in the final 4 games of that second round series. They don't have that continuity. I also think, quite frankly, they really didn't need Harden. They needed that complete lineup to go 5 on out. They can't fully do that with Zubats and Russell Westbrook. At times with Harden, they can do it, but then they're not going to have the perimeter defense with him and Terrence Mann. I believe there's a lot of different questions. And ultimately, with the Clippers, I'm not buying it until I see it.
Who do you trust more in the playoffs, Kawhi or SGA?
Do you want me to include injuries? Because it's going to change my answer. Is this real life or with injuries turned off?
What do you mean real life? I mean, John, it's a simple question. Stop beating around the bush and answer the damn question.
Because if we have injuries on, meaning it's real life, I would rather have Shea because I can trust him to be healthy at that age.
You're convincing yourself to pick SGA. That's fine. You pick SGA. Even if you picked SGA, is it not a toss-up? Is it not I got to think about a question?
It's much like Tatum and Kawhi. Much like it. Because availability is going to be the main determining factor for me.
Okay. Is there a player on the Clippers? Is there a player on OKC that you trust more in the playoffs than Paul George? No. Even with James Harden's struggles,
right?
Is there a player on OKC that you trust more than James Harden in the playoffs?
Yeah, I don't trust James Harden in the playoffs, so I trust Chet Holmgren to be more impactful on winning.
And you trust Jalen Williams, I guess, to be more impactful, and Casey Wallace to be more impactful than
No,
James Harden as
not
well.
Jalen Williams personally.
Oh, not Jalen Williams, but Chet Holmgren, you do. That's what
Because
you do.
Jalen Williams, not quite the playmaker that Harden is, not even close
Okay,
actually. So
okay.
not like a quarter of the playmaker Harden is, but Chet, yeah.
And you trust Mark Daigneault to more than Tyronn Lue. That's what you said, right?
No, I never
Oh,
said
no,
that.
so
I
you,
said they're
you
in the
just said
same tier of coaches.
you just said no. You
They're
just
both
said
top
Mark
10
Daigneault.
coaches.
I just asked you who's a better coach, and you said Mark Daigneault. That's what you said.
I said they're in
So
the same tier.
you think a guy's better, but
You
you don't trust
disagreed
him.
with me, so then I confirmed that they're in the same tier for you,
So
as you would see in regular season
Mark
reporting.
Daigneault, who has no playoff series wins, is in the
Yeah.
same tier as Tyronn Lue.
What playoff series has Tyronn Lue won the last 2 years?
They just made the WCF, John. What do
3
you mean?
years ago.
This past season, they lost in the first round because Kawhi and Paul George were not healthy.
Right.
The year before that, they didn't make the playoffs because Kawhi was hurt the entire year, and Paul George was also dealing with injuries. The year before that, they won 2 playoff series.
Yeah.
And the year before that, they won a playoff series. I mean,
I think Tyronn Lue is a higher ceiling raiser, and he's got a
Tyronn Lue's an
championship.
NBA champion. He's won a championship before.
But I believe Mark Daigneault is a higher floor raiser at his teams. I also think Tyronn Lue, too, while he has made phenomenal adjustments in the postseason to really change and shift series, he's went to those pivots later than he needed to. Like versus the Mavericks.
Why is Mark Daigneault a higher floor raiser? That doesn't even make sense.
I believe his teams defend with way higher activity, and there's way more engagement and accountability within that.
So higher accountability. So what are you using to even measure that? So he's a higher floor raiser because their defenses have ranked higher. That's what you're basically saying.
Thunder were a top 10 defense without a rim protector. Think about how crazy that is.
Okay, you said Mark Daigneault is a higher floor raiser. If I'm not mistaken, John, Mark Daigneault only has 2 seasons of actually being a coach that is winning games. Last year and this season.
The Thunder have only been trying to win the last 2 years.
Obviously. Last year when they made the play-in game last year, Mark Daigneault, SGA was healthy for most of the season, correct?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, did the Clippers make the play-in, or they barely missed the play-in? Oh no, they made the playoffs last year. 2 years ago when Kawhi was hurt, the entire season, the Clippers made the play-in with Paul George leading them, but Paul George even was injured that year. That year, Tyronn Lue had a ton of rotational players that led them to the play-in because he was dealing with injuries to not only his main star Kawhi, but everybody around the team, and they still made the play-in, and they lost in the play-in because Paul George had COVID, and then they faced the Timberwolves. So when you talk about he's a higher floor raiser, well, Tyronn Lue has also led a team to the play-in that hasn't had overwhelming talent that's lost the main star. So what are you saying higher floor raiser? You have no evidence to back that up outside of these buzzwords, accountability. You got no substance.
I ultimately think it comes down to the defense. With the parts the Oklahoma City Thunder have, they've built a way higher floor as a team. Whereas with Tyronn Lue, I think his adjustments in the postseason just make him a more proven ceiling raiser. That's why he'll be considered a better coach. But when looking at the best coaching jobs right now, I think Mark Daigneault's been a consistent coach of the year candidate the last 2 years. And just because he's not as proven or established doesn't mean he can't, in the postseason, make these adjustments because the players are all bought into him. There's a reason why every single time the Thunder have gotten huge stops in the fourth quarter, it's Shea, it's Kaysen, all defending together, Lou Dort's development. I think their entire roster, every single perimeter defender, damn near minus Josh Giddey, and that's because he just doesn't have the tools to defend, have been really locked in. And anytime one of them is not locked in, he has set the culture and the precedent to defend your tail off, because if you don't, you're going to get benched.
So why isn't Josh Giddey benched? Why is Josh Giddey still in the starting lineup?
I said before, I think they're trying to raise his trade value. I think they're just trying to make it work to get the most possible return. And that's a Sam Presti special.
So a coach that holds his players accountable, and if you don't play defense, you get benched, is still starting his worst defender on the roster to raise the trade value. So that's not holding a player accountable. That's politics. Is that not correct?
Absolutely politics. But like I said,
so he's not holding Giddey accountable. So he's not holding Giddey accountable.
I'm sharing with you, even with Giddey starting, they have a top 3 net rating.
Sure,
They are a
sure.
top 3 seed in the
Okay, that's
conference.
fine.
So it's
That's
not like
fine.
it's
That's
not
fine.
like it's negatively affecting their standing.
Well,
And quite
it
frankly,
is negatively affecting
it's
their team because when Giddy's on the floor, their point differential is not as good. Point per
yes.
75 possessions, SGA with Giddy on the floor is averaging 25, 26 points per game.
Yeah.
Without Giddy, he's averaging 40. So you're limiting your star player more when Giddy's on the floor with your star player. So tell me again, you're talking about Mark Daigneault having a culture of accountability, but
Yeah.
Josh Giddey has not been benched. So
Because
therefore, he's
temporary.
not holding Josh Giddey accountable. Can you admit that?
I think it's a temporary thing, personally.
No. Can you
And
admit that he's not holding Josh Giddey accountable, even
I
if it's temporary?
shared with you before,
He's not holding Josh Giddey accountable because he hasn't been benched.
Josh Giddey simply doesn't have the tools to be a good defender. He can't move. He's not very strong at that size at 6'8". I don't think it's as much of Josh Giddey because he does have lapses off the ball. I don't think it's as much of Josh Giddey doesn't want to defend as much as it is he's just not
I
going to
ain't
be.
even talking about defense. I know he's trash on defense. Offensively, he offers nothing. They leave him wide open. His man helps off all the time to double team any ball handler, and he's wide ass open and passes up shots. And he still hasn't been benched. He's still a starter, if I'm not mistaken. He started
Yes,
every
he
game
started every game.
this season. So Mark Daigneault has now held Josh Giddey accountable. Yes or no?
No. But this is
Okay,
the
that's
and
it.
only thing that I've disagreed with.
Mr. Accountable Coach has not held the worst starting lineup player on his team accountable.
If
Good.
that's a decision by the GM, if that's a decision that's being enforced by the GM, can you really put the blame on the head coach?
You're assuming. That's not fact. You're assuming. You're guessing because that could be a lie. That could
That's
be a
the
lie.
logical explanation that I can
That's
come
not
down
a lie.
to on the
In
outside.
your mind, because you're making an assumption to defend your initial point, but ultimately
Sure.
he's not holding Giddey accountable. Do we know why? No, we don't. Right? His trade value, given the allegations he has right now against him, it's in the gutter already. There's not much that you can raise. So ultimately, he's not holding Giddey accountable. Mr. Accountable head coach not holding Giddey accountable. That's all I want to say. Because that's what you use in favor of Tyronn Lue, accountability. But he's not holding Giddey accountable.
I'm at a point where I don't really view Josh Giddey as a core tenant. And I think all of the core pieces in Oklahoma City that really fit in are the ones who have been held very accountable. The ones that really do matter for the long-term success and playoff scalability. How well Jalen Williams, how well Chet, how well Shea, and all of the other role players who offensively have thrived, like Isaiah's Joe. Last year, Dario Saric. The last 2 years has been Jalen Williams. And Kenrich Williams has been that for 3.5 years. Every single role player here fulfills a role and brings two-way value. And I think a lot of that is a byproduct of the head coach. Because a lot of young coaches, Joel, are not going to hold their players accountable defensively. And he has for 2 years now. I think that track record to raise his team's floor is already proven to be there. And it's continuing to scale. The playoff questions, that's just because he hasn't had the opportunity. And I think, like many coaches, he'll probably struggle in that first playoff run because that's an expectation you have to learn, grow, and probably get more reps in. That's why I think Tyronn Lue is at a higher level, but I think they're in the same exact tier as I shared to start. I think they're 2 of the 10 best coaches in the NBA.
If I'm if we're on an elevator and I'm on a higher level than you in an elevator, we're not in the same tier. We're on different floors. If I'm on a higher level than you, we're on a different floor.
We're in the same exact building, though, brother.
But we're on a different floor. That's not the same. You could have the basement view. I have the window skyscraper view. That's different.
That's a great analogy. I'll give you credit.
Now listen, John. So you have OKC as the second best team in the West.
I would have the Minnesota Timberwolves number 2, and then the Oklahoma City has like a 3, and then the Suns would be a 3B.
So OKC should make the So OKC, what's the disappointment for them? Losing in the first round, losing in the second round. What is it? What's your expectation for them
in the first rounds? I think the expectation is with home court advantage, they should win in round 1 and have a competitive round 2. I think for this year, that's very fair with how well they've played.
Okay.
But having them at number 2, you convinced me. I think Minnesota with the number 1 seed should be clearly in a good position to go. And they haven't won a playoff series since 2004. Second round is like, it feels like a very fluid thing right now. And the conference finals, maybe a 50-50 chance they can go, which is really good.
Okay. I listen, I think that's sound logic. I think that is. We're going to wrap up the show by doing NFL Week 16 upset picks. Now, I don't know about you, John, but I only got 3 upset picks this week. And my upset picks are going to be Colts plus 2.5 on the road versus the Atlanta Falcons. Taylor Heineke starting. I don't even think Desmond Ritter has been that bad. I just think Atlanta needs some answers. Atlanta cannot run the ball, and I feel like they don't get the ball in their playmakers' hands. It feels like Arthur Smith is sabotaging fantasy managers all over the world that own Drake London and Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts with
Well,
these
got
fantasy
back.
playoffs. But Colts plus 2.5, I like a lot. The Colts have playing really solid. They just blew out the Steelers on, standalone primetime game, you could say, Thursday. So I like the Colts in this matchup. I think they should win, but Atlanta has been a great home team, so that's not going
Mm,
to be easy. But Jonathan Taylor should be playing, and Michael Pittman Jr. should be playing as well, so that's huge. Other one is Commanders plus 3. I went back and forth with this one because the Jets have a great defense and the Commanders have a terrible defense. And you can argue the Jets could move the ball on them, which I
right.
think they can. And if you favor the Jets defense, you say they're a more all around team. I can see why they're favored. I just believe in backup quarterbacks first starts winning. This entire season, that's kind of been what it's been, where the first time a backup quarterback starts, they win a game. And I don't think Jacoby Brissett is actually a backup. I think all season long,
Spot
he's
start.
been better than Sam Howell, but he hasn't started because of
Mhm.
politics. And the best way for Ron Rivera to keep his job was to prove to ownership that Sam Howell can be the future of the team. So I think Jacoby Brissett can have a pretty good day. They have receivers, the Commanders do, and maybe this might be a prove-it game for Ron Rivera, who is a defensive coach, against a Jets offense that struggles to move the ball at all. And the last upset, this is the one I feel best about. It's the Cardinals plus 4.5. They're
Hmm.
facing the Chicago Bears, and the Bears have been playing pretty good. So I'm not going to knock the Bears at all. I think they're playing some good football. But you look at the Cardinals, I think that this line doesn't reflect the type of team they are because they lost to the 49ers 45-29. We can all agree the Niners are by far the most overwhelming team in football. And yet the Cardinals had a closer game with them than the Eagles and the Cowboys did. Then they lost to no, then they beat the Steelers 24-10. Their defense showed up versus that Steelers offense that's very inconsistent. Their offense showed up against the top 10 defense. They lost to the Rams 14-27. The Rams have been one of the hottest teams in the NFC as of late. And they lost to the Texans 21-16. And they beat the Falcons 25-23. So when Kyler has been back, this team has been 2-3. And the 3 losses that they've had have been against playoff teams, the Texans, the Rams, and the 49ers. So I think against the Bears team, I think the Bears are kind of being overvalued in this market. I think they're very similar teams. And Kyler Murray, this could be a vintage game for him back. So I'm going to go with the Cardinals in this one. I think they'll beat the Bears.
It's a good one. One, this is very risky run because Trevor Lawrence is in concussion protocol and has to clear by tomorrow, as the Jaguars are 1.5 point underdogs versus the Buccaneers. And I look at Trevor, I look at a Jaguar team that's lost 3 straight games versus a Buccaneer team that's been on their high 1-2 straight. If Trevor Lawrence plays, I like the Jaguars in that mark because both teams can't run the football, and I have more faith in the Jaguars coaching, quarterback, and defense, to be honest with you, with their cornerbacks and edge rushers. Another matchup for me that I like, you're going to think I'm crazy. The Packers are 4-point favorites at Carolina. If
Mm.
there's one team that could make the Panthers wide receivers look good, it's probably Joe Barry, because in spite of having really good press man corners, he will not do that with his personnel, and playing off against the Panthers wide receivers could be a big opportunity for them to have a get right week. We saw them surprise the Texans at home. I would not be surprised if the Panthers cover. It's plus 5.5. That would be my biggest upset alert pick of the week.
I think those are some good picks. Joe Barry got to figure something out, man. All of Baker Mayfield's completions were uncontested. Just
Right.
goes to show you how wide open it was. I think the Packers bounced back, though. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Joel Moran Show with John Tortorelli. We gave you guys a heated kind of pick a side debate right there. So hopefully you guys
Absolutely.
enjoyed. Make sure you guys use the free square on Prize Picks. Kevin Durant just needs 1 point and
After
you
30
win.
plus.
It's a free square. You can use it if you have Prize Picks. If you don't have Prize Picks, you download it. Use code PAS on your first deposit. It helps us out a lot, and it helps you because it gives you a 100% deposit match up to $100. But I can't stress it enough. It's a free square. It's a free play. You might as well use it. So download the app. Use the code PAS. It helps us out a lot at Pick a Side. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.